Past 8 now.
The Radio Wammo Breakfast.
Talking politics with Russell Norman.
Yes, co-leader of the Greens, talking green politics and much, much more. He joins us this morning. Good morning to you, Russell.
Morning, Wammo. How's it going?
Very, very good. Hey, first up, yesterday in Parliament, you asked the question to the government, does the government own in Mckinsey Country, how many hectares does the government own? And has the government given consent for any of it to be converted to irrigated dairy? What response did you get?
We got a response that, yeah, they do own quite a lot of it, and they haven't received any applications. The thing is that a lot of the country that's being proposed to be converted from tussock into irrigated dairying in the Mckinsey High Country is actually government-owned land. It's owned by us.
Right.
And they have to get consent from the landowner in order to convert it under the Crown Pastoral Land Act. And so we said, well, have they asked for consent? And the answer is no, they're just kind of going ahead with it.
Oh, so it's not the fact that it's not happening, it actually is happening, but it's happening, what, through the back door or something?
Well, what they've done is they've put in all their applications for a resource consent to the regional council, because they have to go to the regional council to get a resource consent, but they haven't, as of yet, bothered to ask the landowner whether the landowner, that is the people of New Zealand, approve with this conversion.
Right, okay, I
to
get
intensive dairying.
Should they be asking us?
Yeah, they're legally required to. What we figure is actually going on is that there's this pastoral lease review process whereby these high country pastoral leases are converted into freehold. They're basically given away. And so what I reckon's going on is that the farmers, or the leasees rather, up there, figure that they're going to get the land freehold anyway, so they don't need to apply.
Okay. So does that mean now that they will ask us, now that you've asked the question of the government?
Well, it's put the wind up the LINZ, Land Information New Zealand, which oversees all of this, and the Commissioner of Crown Land, because basically they're just totally on the farmers and are just giving it, just giving the land, public land away effectively. So I think it's put the wind up them, and we might actually see some proper following of proper process.
Because the general, anecdotal consensus says that that New Zealanders are not in favour of Mckinsey Country basically turning green. I mean, the colour green.
Of course they're not. I mean, that's the absurd situation, is that this is our land, owned by the people of New Zealand. Surely we should have the right to say we don't want it converted into intensive dairying. And the government should step in to make sure that happens. I mean, they're supposed to be looking after it on behalf of all of us. The problem is, of course, that the last government was dead scared of fed farmers, and this government's kind of a fully owned kind of part of federated farmers. So, it just means that, you've got governments that are unwilling to take on the industrial farming lobby.
Yeah. Russell, what information have you received this week about the oil supply situation in the world?
Well, there was a very interesting report came out in the UK, which was a peak oil task force report, but it's put out by an industry group headed up by Richard Branson from Virgin Airlines. And what they're doing is just restating the evidence, which is plain as day for anyone who looks, that we are facing the end of cheap oil and further significant oil price shocks. We had one in 2008, and I think that 2007, 2008, and I think, that they're stating the obvious, that governments actually need to urgently prepare their economies for the fact that oil is not going to continue to be cheap. And, it's obvious really for anyone who's looked at the evidence.
Yeah.
They need to do it in the UK, but we really need to do it here. We've got a transport sector which is desperately dependent on oil, and an agricultural sector which is very dependent on gas for nitrogen, for, urea fertiliser.
Yeah. Did the task force give any kind of indication of when they expect the next petrol price hike?
Well, they're saying that peak oil, that is the point of maximum production of oil, is probably about 5 years away. So, obviously price is a result of supply and demand plus speculation. And so they're saying the supply will probably be at its maximum level ever. That is, the number of barrels of oil that you can suck out of the ground in a year will probably hit its maximum point in about 5 years. And what we're seeing on the demand side is that as the kind of fragile global recovery takes place, is that demand will go up again. And so the result of that is that, of course, you get price spikes as obviously demand outstrips supply. And then on top of that, you get all the speculative movements as well as people try to figure out how they can make money out of that.
I guess the funny thing about this, or even the sad thing about this, is that as soon as the next petrol price hike happens, next crisis with oil, everything else we've been talking about at the moment, like tax breaks, GST, blah, all that, it's all thrown out the window. It just changes the whole game all over again.
Yeah, it does, and it changes New Zealand's economic position very quickly. Because we're such a big consumer of oil, we've been in a position where we've been able to export some oil out of the Tui fields, but they're pretty small fields. They're not large oil fields we've got off Taranaki. And so because we're so dependent on imported oil, it really rocks the New Zealand economy and causes us tremendous problems. And, this obviously this is a government which just told us in John Key's speech that they're planning to spend a new $10.7 billion on new state highways over the next 10 years when, as soon as oil prices go through the roof, everyone tries to get on public transport. And, of course, our public transport systems are woeful.
So are you aware of any kind of task force or committee that's maybe locked away somewhere deep in the bowels of Parliament that is even worried about this or even looking at it?
The parliamentarians are pretty much brain dead. They just don't, see, they don't read evidence and they don't look at what's going on. They're told everything's fine and they're perfectly happy with that, like little puppy dogs. But the reality is quite different. So there's nothing happening. There's kind of not a lot of thinking going on in Parliament. There's a little bit of thinking going on in Treasury where they set up a unit to try to model some of the future pricing. So that's probably about it at the moment.
Russell, finally, the government is looking at reforming the Electoral Finance Act and removing the spending caps for groups campaigning in elections. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, my view is that the principles that should guide it are that we don't want politicians owned by those who give them donations. And the problem is if you don't have spending caps, then basically political parties and parallel campaigners will spend as much as they possibly can during an election campaign, which means that they're then totally dependent on whoever supplies all that money. So the ideal situation, if you're a wealthy corporation who wants to control the government, is to have political parties dependent on those high levels of donations. And that's why spending caps are so important. If you can't actually spend more money, then there's not much point raising lots more money in the first place. So you don't create this relationship of dependency between political parties and donors. And those political parties, of course, go on to become government.
Yeah. What about this?
One of them or two of them do.
What about this idea that when other groups outside of government do put out adverts that they have the little notice at the bottom that says where the advert came from? So if it came from the Exclusive Brethren, it would have the Exclusive Brethren at the bottom.
There's probably, you could argue, some progress in that they've said for parallel campaigning groups, if they spend more than $12,000, they have to register with the Electoral Commission. What we saw with the Exclusive Brethren was the difficulty of connecting whoever might have paid for the advert with the group.
Yeah.
So there still remains that problem. And to be honest, that's not a simple problem to solve. I mean, it's not even just, Nationals trying to hide or trying to, help the big donors like they are with the fact that they haven't put a cap in. It actually is a problem because, like the Exclusive Brethren, it was a number of people working together, but they argued they were just acting as individuals.
Right,
so
yeah.
It's not always simple to solve.
So the person actually paying for it could be one or two people removed from a group like the Exclusive Brethren, but the money has in fact flowed from there in the first place.
Yeah, that's right.
Russell,
and so when we had the registration process, there was all these rules about you've got to declare the donations to the to whoever's doing it all, whereas National getting rid of all that.
Okay. Russell, it sounds like you've managed to negotiate public transport all the way into Parliament today while talking to us.
Right.
Well done. Thanks very much. We'll talk to you next week.
Okay, thanks very much.
It is co-leader of the Greens,